So, one of my favorite filmmakers is the South Korean director Bong Joon-ho. I remember seeing his film The Host when it came out in theaters when I was like 16, and it blew my mind. His stuff is really dark and quirky, and he didn't really break out in the US in a huge way until Snowpiercer came out. I really like Snowpiercer, but one interesting thing about it was that it reminded me of my favorite movie of all time. Okay, I may have lost a lot of you there. How could an incredibly violent R-rated movie set in the post-apocalypse from 2013 possibly remind me of a children's classic from the 1970s? Well, they're both two movies about groups of people that work their way through a large, fantastic structure. One by one, a person from the group is removed in each room until one person makes it to the very end, who then found out that the entire thing was a test because a wealthy industrialist needed to find a new successor. Okay, are you still with me? Because the more I've been thinking about it, the more I'm convinced that Snowpiercer is a sequel to Willy Wonka, and Ed Harris plays the adult version of Charlie Bucket, who took over Wonka's candy empire, and who is the one who built the super train. Before I start getting into the specifics, let's take a look at the broad commonalities that these movies have. Both of the plots heavily revolve around economic class structures, children, food, and I mean food in a big way.
I know what people taste like.
Roast beef and a baked potato!
But most interesting of all, both of these stories thematically examine sacrifice, choice, and free will. There are few moments in Willy Wonka, if you think about them, play into the idea of fate and the roles that certain people are destined to fulfill.
Do you ask a fish how it swims?
No.
Or a bird how it flies?
No.
No, sirree, you don't. They do it because they were born to do it.
I am a hat. You are a shoe. We must each of us occupy our preordained particular position.
Just like Willy Wonka was born to be a candy man, and you look like you were born to be a Wonkerer.
Curtis, this is your destiny.
Now let's look at the hard facts. Remember that Willy Wonka specializes in creating two different things in his factory: state-of-the-art food production and experimental modes of transportation. And he does all of this in a factory that is completely sealed off from the outside world, meaning that Wonka has the technology to make a food-producing factory that is self-contained and self-sustaining.
And this train is a closed ecosystem.
Nobody ever goes in. Nobody ever comes out.
With that in mind, let's try to piece together a hypothetical timeline that links these two movies. At the end of Willy Wonka, Charlie inherits the factory. He does his best to continue Wonka's philosophy of decadence and imagination. But let's suppose that Charlie ends up forsaking his last name Bucket, and as an apprentice takes on the name of Wonka, specifically Wilfred Wonka. And also, like his teacher, is sure to brand everything with a giant W. Fast forward to 2014. In an effort to combat global warming, the governments of the world agree to disperse the gas CW7. Charlie, now known as Wilfred, is one of the few people that can foresee the devastating consequences of this gas, given his experience in chemistry, which is actually foreshadowed in this overlooked scene in the original Willy Wonka.
Good lad, pour. No, certainly not. This is for very big waltz.
Realizing that CW7 would be too effective in cooling the planet, Charlie devised his only plan that he could to save the rest of humanity, by focusing on Wonka's transportation and self-sustaining aspects and making the Snowpiercer. under the guise that it was simply just another luxury product. Saving all of humanity comes at a great cost, though. Charlie knows that the population is going to have to be strictly regulated in order to keep the train self-sustaining, which is going to involve the loss of human lives.
Precisely 74% of you shall die.
Is it still the same number?
Yes, it still stands at 74%.
This important role that percentages will play in his future is once again foreshadowed in a classroom scene.
Percentages. And for an example, let's take the recent unpleasantness.
Surviving the near extinction of the human race causes Charlie to go completely insane and take drastic measures in order to try and preserve humanity. But it is important to note he still holds on to Wonka's sense of decadence and imagination. In fact, there's a lot of things that he borrows from Wonka's playbook. All of Wilford's shock and awe manipulation tactics were actually learned from Willy Wonka.
Understood we need to maintain a proper balance of anxiety and fear, chaos and horror in order to keep life going. And if we don't have that, we need to invent it.
When it came time to find a successor, Wilford even borrowed Wonka's method of hiding messages inside of food. And using spies.
That wasn't what Gilliam and I had in our plan.
What?
No, don't tell me you didn't know. Gilliam and I, our plan.
Come in, Mr. Wilkinson. Charlie, meet Mr. Wilkinson.
Pleasure.
Slugworth.
No, that's not Slugworth. He works for me.
Alright, pause for a second. Feel free to call me crazy if you haven't already. But don't you think that there's a little bit more than a passing resemblance between Mr. Wilkinson, the spy hired by Willy Wonka to play Slugworth, and Gilliam, the leader of the back section of the train that was secretly working for Wilford all the time? Would it be too much of a stretch to assume that they are in fact the same person? The timelines match up, and it makes sense that Wilford would refer to Gilliam as an old friend. And having it be the same character adds a layer of significance to this moment from earlier in the movie.
I'm a shadow of my former shadow. My day was decades ago.
And the strange thing is, he might not be the only character still alive. Fair warning, even I think this next part's a bit of a stretch, so if you want to get back to more reasonable things in this already unreasonable video, just skip to this mark. There's something weird about the passengers in first class that Wilford has in charge of the train. Why would these people who are insane and selfish be left in charge? Well, one could look at it as a deliberate statement of satire, or maybe these were all significant figures from Wilford's past. One of the most mysterious and enigmatic figures in Snowpiercer is the seemingly unstoppable and almost mute gunman, Franco the Elder. In a train that's supposedly run out of bullets, how is this man so skilled? Well, what if he's had an obsession with guns since he was a child?
I'm Mike TV. Well, you're dead.
One can easily see how this young boy with an obsession of fictional violence could grow up to become a deadly soldier.
Like the killings, huh?
What do you think life's all about?
Mike, would you tell us
Wait till I get a real one.
I also don't think it's a coincidence that he delivers his first devastating kill on a TV screen. Maybe Charlie/Wilford kept his fellow golden ticket winners around as an example of his twisted sense of mercy.
And Wilford is divine! Wilford is merciful!
Tilda Swinton gave an iconic performance as Minister Mason. But what if Minister Mason is just the future version of...
I'm Veruca Salt.
Now you might think I'm reaching here because these two characters don't seem that similar at first. We don't know what Veruca is like after surviving the garbage chute. Remember, her and her father were trapped together, and there's a good chance she narrowly avoided getting incinerated. This could have traumatized Veruca and changed her entire outlook on life. Instead of being ungrateful, she now became too grateful, fanatically devoted to the graces of Charlie, who saved her life.
You people who have suckled the generous titty of Wilford.
But she still keeps her ill temper and tendency to insult people.
You filthy ingrates!
You're always making things difficult.
Now, I understand the idea that Tilda Swinton is playing a traumatized Veruca Salt is a little thin, but there are at least two facts you can admit. They both have fur coats, and both of these characters always enter the room first.
I want to go in first before anybody else.
Ladies first, and that means Veruca.
Mr. Salt finally got what he wanted.
What's that?
Veruca went first.
The last major member of Wilford's posse is the child catcher, Claude. And almost little to no information is given to us about this character. The clearest details we get about her are her body type, her lack of impulse control.
God damn it, Claude, mind the engine! She's getting sensitive recently.
And the fact that she eats her own blood. And there's a character in Willy Wonka that exhibits all of these tendencies.
The boy's name? Augustus Gloop.
Both of these characters have ravenous appetites, poor impulse control,
Augustus!
and members of the Gloop family are known to eat even inanimate objects. Claude might just be the daughter of Augustus Gloop. As for Violet Beauregard, well, I confess she doesn't really fit into this theory. But it is worth mentioning there's another woman with a giant swollen belly. Also, there's a candy in Willy Wonka that could be seen as the precursor to the flammable waste drug Kronel. No, it's not the everlasting gobstopper. It's the exploding gum for your enemies that Mike TV eats.
I told you not to, silly boy.
간단히 말해서 폭탄이 새끼야.
But there's one key signature element from Willy Wonka that isn't present in this linked Snowpiercer theory. But in a weird way, the fact that it's missing proves that these two films are connected. And I'm of course talking about the Oompa Loompas.
I've got a perfect puzzle for you.
Surely, if this was indeed a sequel to Willy Wonka, wouldn't there be Oompa Loompas everywhere working on the train? Well, they would have been if they didn't go extinct. All of Wonka's prior transportation technology was operated by Oompa Loompas. It was operated by tiny people.
The space only allows for a very small person. The engine lasts forever, but not so all of its parts. That piece of equipment went extinct recently.
Maybe it was because of the climate, maybe it's because there is no female Oompa Loompa and thus they can't procreate. But once all the Oompa Loompas died out, Wilfred Wonka needed the next best thing to keep his perpetual engine running. Small children. Now all of this leads to one big question. Why have I been so obsessed with this? For years. I've literally wanted to make this video for years. And like, this is a really esoteric thing to keep being obsessed about. But I think there's an important reason why it's stuck in my head. It made me appreciate the fine details of these excellent movies. Like how both Wilford and Wonka greet their guests by saying,
Curtis, dear boy.
Charlie, my boy.
And I think they make both movies more interesting. Selflessness is a very important part of Snowpiercer, and Curtis has been longing to sacrifice his arm through the entire movie. In the end, he finally achieves that selfless sacrifice just like Charlie did at the end of Willy Wonka when he gave up the everlasting gobstopper. And it adds a twisted note to Wilford's final moment when he witnesses a sacrifice against himself that parallels his own. All he can say is,
Nice.
And I don't think this theory ruins the end of Willy Wonka by having Charlie turn evil. When you think about it, both movies end with a hug, and with the notion that the children are really the ones that will carry on the future for us. Sure, this is all kind of ridiculous to believe, but maybe it is true, and all it takes is a little imagination. But most importantly, if you enjoyed this video, all I ask is this. Tweet at Chris Evans. Tell him to watch this video and make him admit once and for all that Snowpiercer is a sequel to Willy Wonka. If he says it, it's canon, because that's totally how this stuff works. There's also some more cool stuff on this channel, including some original series and ridiculous shorts. You know, feel free, check it out. It's really good stuff, I promise. Thanks you guys. Bye.